So Cliff, those that at a distance resemble another. What did you think?
Yeah, well, I guess I knew a little bit about this film from the fact that I had watched the trailer. So I kind of wasn't expecting it to be entertaining or, thrilling or, but even so, I still find it quite hard work, kind of 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes in. I wasn't sure about it. I think that, it's an interesting question as to what this film is. I think I've talked in a couple of other podcasts about, feature films versus works of art. And of course, it's not a clear distinction. There's no dividing line. There's no reason why a film can't be kind of a feature film that's entertaining, but also be a work of art and be an art house movie. So it's not like there's a clear line. But I think that this film is clearly at one end of that scale in that it is an artwork. It's not what you might call a feature film that you would, go and sit in the cinema and watch. And I think it's quite important to watch it as an artwork, because I think once I got beyond the 15 minutes, I settled into watching it as an artwork, which definitely I started to find it easier and a lot more interesting and enjoyable once I did that. So I think that this is a good example of a film that you need to approach it with the right frame of mind. If you just walk into, say, a cinema like the BFI in London, where you didn't know what you were going to see, but you may well be seeing an entertaining kind of feature film, you could be disappointed on watching this, because you kind of have to be in the right frame of mind. So that's the first point I'd make. I've also talked a bit recently about, whether films are best watched in a gallery or in a cinema. And actually, I had the feeling with this film that it was best to watch it on TV. I don't think if I was walking into an installation and this film was showing, I'm not sure that I would last longer than 5 minutes, to be honest. To the extent this film works, I'm not sure it would work in a gallery setting. I'm also not sure it would work in a cinema. But where it really did work was watching it on TV with headphones. I had headphones on, and I think the sound in this film is absolutely critical to the success of it. This film is a sound experience, probably more than anything else in this film, which struck me. It is the sound. It's the thing I really enjoyed, and the thing that made the film, a really good experience. I did take the headphones off just to see how it sounded without the headphones, and I've got a sound bar, and it definitely wasn't as good. Even though the sound was good quality, there was something about the intensity of the sound with headphones. So I think that actually watching this film with headphones is really critical. I also tried it on the computer with just the computer sound, and it was, it just wasn't the same experience. I think that, in some ways, I think you mentioned it recently, the Chantal Akerman film of Jean Dielman, 23 Commerce Key. That film, one thing I loved about that film, and it's 3 3/4 hours. I was just checking the title of it. It's 3 3/4 hours. And I think one of the things I found fascinating about that film was the sound, because it was just mundane sounds. And I found that when I stopped watching that film, I was kind of hypersensitive to sound myself. And I went into the kitchen and I was cooking something, and I was hearing every sound. The film was so successful in kind of as a sound experience that it had really woken up my senses. And, then back in my real world, I was experiencing sound in a different way. And that was a really successful film, I think. And I think that this film had that quality in it. You know, I think it records this with great precision, the smallest gestures and the smallest sounds, which just have an intensity that really activate the senses. And I really, really like that. And then, you know, later in the film, when you see someone sawing something, that I found that really, I really felt the sawing, because we were so sensitized to the little movement of plastic, or, you know, scraping or rubbing things. And suddenly when someone was sawing, it felt like a really violent action. And, you know, I realized how successful the film had been at kind of waking up my senses. So that I ended, by the end of the film, I loved that about it. I think the way the film was shot is really interesting. I mean, you know, I wasn't really sure, and I'm still not 100% sure, but I think, you know, I have my views, whether this was kind of found footage or whether it was deliberately shot, because it does look like kind of bad footage from some, you know, information film that was made, or some kind of poorly made documentary from the past. It was slightly amateurish. The film looked old and grainy. It was washed out. You know, often the shots weren't well composed. I think I came to the view that she shot all of this, and that it was shot in that way, and that actually it does work. You know, and it's not visually that it's interesting or poetic or beautiful, but somehow I think, I mean, maybe it does leave the primary experience one of sound rather than what you're looking at. But I thought that was interesting, but I can't quite define why. There were intriguing things, like the way that throughout the film there's animal noises in the background. It kind of made me laugh at times, because it was, you know, but they didn't feel out of place. But clearly they were out of place, because we were in these, you know, quiet laboratories where people were laboriously doing these very fine tasks. So clearly there weren't going to be animals in these places. And so I thought that was very interesting. And I also found it intriguing, as it wasn't, I'm still not clear on this, whether when there was speaking, whether it was the same person speaking that we were seeing, or, you know, whether they were actually concurrent, whether that speaking was from a different interview and was put on, you know, didn't necessarily go with what we saw. So I really liked that. I think the film was kind of just unexpected, and yeah, kind of just, you know, that really worked. I also think, and this makes the film really strong for me, the film does have kind of really strong conceptual underpinnings. You know, obviously there's a whole debate about the authenticity of a copy, and I was remembering Walter Benjamin writing about, you know, the authenticity of the original, and, you know, whether copies, you know, mechanically reproduced copies are never going to be as authentic as the original. And that whole debate of kind of an original copy, you know, here we had people making things that were an original, they were an original cast, say, of a bone or tusk, but they were a copy, you know. And there's the whole question of, clearly these were craftspeople, these were artists, these were making incredible sculpture that no one had made before, apart from, you know, the animal being created. And, you know, but they were copies. So I think that was really interesting, you know, how it played all the way through, really, with the idea of the artist versus the duplicator. And, you know, that clip at the beginning, which is a bit baffling when you first see it, where they're talking about the monkey being pregnant, and if there were two monkeys, you know, I went back and watched it at the end, because I was thinking, yeah, there's like a copy, you know, they're going to have a baby monkey, but they were talking about if there were two monkeys, you know, obviously there'd be a copy of the baby, or there'd be, you know, two babies which were copies of monkeys. And so, you know, there were lots of interesting issues like that. One scene slightly jarred for me, which although the filming seemed slightly amateurish and, you know, in a good way, there was one scene where someone was kind of fixing the side of a box, and then they opened the box and they started taking things out. And it became really obvious that they were picking up things and kind of looking at them in a way that felt very staged. And, you know, maybe that was deliberate, but it just kind of stood out in relation to the whole film, because it didn't feel like any of the people, any of the craft that we saw in the film was ever staged, but that did feel like it was staged. And I just, you know, that just slightly jarred, but it's certainly not a negative comment. I mean, you know, I think in conclusion, I think I'd say that this isn't, you know, if you go to watch this film expecting to be entertained, or even seeing it as, you know, a kind of feature film, you might be disappointed. But as an artwork, I found it, you know, fascinating, both kind of conceptually and as an experience. So, you know, I really liked it.
Yeah, I broadly agree with you. And as you say, we've spoken a couple of times about this idea of where a film most naturally belongs. And I hadn't really gotten to grips with how I felt about that issue until you were talking. And then I realized that I guess what it comes down to is that, perhaps this is a really obvious point, but it just occurred to me that where we see a film conditions what we expect of it, right? So because we're used to going to a cinema where that conditions certain expectations about being, you know, entertained in a relatively straightforward way, or in terms of narrative, right, and action and event. And yet when we go to a gallery, we're conditioned to expect completely different things. And I think that's a really good point you made, that the natural home of this is perhaps on television. I would agree with that. Because when the expectations that a gallery piece provokes in me is certainly not the idea that I'm going to stand there for an hour. You know, I don't think I've ever spent an hour standing in a gallery watching a film. And it also occurred to me that actually what we're doing with these podcasts is probably the perfect way of getting to grips with these issues, because when we watch the films blind, we don't have any expectations. So we don't know to begin with what to expect of the film. And I had almost an identical experience of this film. To begin with, I was looking for narrative, and there were what seemed to me like occasional contrivances. Like, to begin with, they kept mentioning they and the experts in a way that to me felt quite pointed, as though it was gesturing towards some, you know, some unseen, shadowy, controlling force that's sort of overseeing the events. And then I realized that I'm probably making more of that than there is to be made, because I'm searching for narrative. And then after a certain point, probably about the same time as you, like 10, 15 minutes, you know, completely understood that this is not a narrative film in any conventional sense, and relaxed that expectation and just enjoyed it for what it is. And I did enjoy it ultimately. I felt, and I was kind of on board with it right from the beginning, because like other films that we've watched recently, it opens with that title card. The difference with this one is that what it said was really interesting, and it did something that a title card can perhaps uniquely do, that it presented a really complex idea, the relationship between a replica and the original, and kind of cut straight to the heart of that ambiguity, you know, the ambiguity surrounding authenticity, by saying that a biological replicant, otherwise known as, you know, a baby, is not in any genuine sense kind of an original. And so it was really smartly sort of cut through and complicated that issue. So as I say, I was immediately on board with it from there. I found the filmmaking style, as you say, the composition it's pretty uniform throughout. It's always an extreme close-up on extremely skillful, precise, intricate work. And I found that eventually really fascinating and absorbing. you know, just the patience of it. And there was I wrote down at one point, I can't remember if it's in voiceover or it must be in voiceover, but someone says, the conservator knows the object so well that they embody the artist who made them. And it's almost like the film itself is replicating that technique. Like if I look closely enough, I will embody and you know, and understand fully this process. So as you say, I think what gives the film its strength is that conceptual underpinning that's consistent and really holds the film together.
I think the point about the expectations is interesting, isn't it? Because Mubi, you know, all the films that we're watching, at least so far, are showing on Mubi in the UK. And, you know, although Mubi, I'm really coming to trust their curation. You know, I even if I don't like a film, I can still see that it has an interest and a merit in. You know, I think Mubi is extremely well curated. That every film they show has an interest, has something interesting about it. But you know, they do show some Hollywood blockbusters, don't they? Because a month or two ago, I watched Heat on there. You know, which is really a Hollywood blockbuster and not an art house film. I mean, it's got iconic scenes in it. So in terms of filmmaking, it's interesting, but I don't, you know, not every film showing on Mubi is an art house film. But I think that, you know, unlike going to a cinema with Mubi, you need to approach it with a completely open mind as to what you're going to see, especially if you don't know anything about the director or really about the film. I mean, we do sometimes look at the trailer. Well, I look at the trailer sometimes, and I do read what it says on the movie description, but I don't find out any more than that about the film. Yeah, I think it's interesting about Mubi, and I agree with you about the title at the beginning. It really works, and actually, I went back and read it again at the end, and it, in fact, you know, tells you what the film's about, really. Yeah. But it does it in a way that, so you could say it's very obvious, and they kind of spoil because I think you could probably get that from the film without that quote, but the quote just really works. I agree. I really liked it when I read it, and then I liked it at the end when I went back to it and read it again, and just digested the film in relation to that. So yeah, I agree.
So our next project is Donnie Darko.
Looking forward to it.